is Venus for the Romans. She's the goddess of beauty and the goddess of love. And we know that she's the one that gives Paris the idea that he could have the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, and so supposedly causes all the trouble. And the cult of Aphrodite was based in Corinth. And of course, Aphrodite is one version of this original female divine, which is Gaia. But she's the one that represents the ideal of youth and beauty and desirability. Okay? So that's one representation of Aphrodite. We can see some more. Another Aphrodite by Kritos. Okay? And then another one by Praxiteles. And this is perhaps the most famous, the Venus of Milos. You can see some draping at the bottom, but the front part is considered one of the most perfect representation of this idealized female Greek beauty. Okay? And you see that it's not a body that is devoted to maternity. She hasn't had many children, I would say. Okay, you can tell. So she's more like offered for desirability and pleasure for the opposite sex or for the same sex. It could be, but it's not, the emphasis is not fertility. Next. And here is the Venus of Milos. And look also at the profile, the typical, celebrated, sculpted Greek face. Okay, next. Another two takes. And you can begin to see. And this is a crouching Aphrodite. This is a little more Hellenistic because the position doesn't emphasize this idealization, but rather a very specific moment in someone's life. Next. Another Aphrodite. You can see here the Hellenism because it's a little more hedonistic. She's not just beauty presented for one's admiration, but rather somebody who's enjoying herself. Hedonistic, Epicurean, bit Hellenistic. Okay. Here we see even later Aphrodite, and we see two other characters. Pan, who is this goddess god of wilderness. He's half animal, half human, part animal, part human. He represents the Greek understanding of wilderness. There is a hybridation between animal and human, and these imaginary creatures, according to the Greeks, populated the forests. Okay, and they had certain magical powers. That little creature there is Eros, one of the representations of Eros. Remember that there are many different ways of seeing Eros, so this is just one. Okay, and it resembles what Eros will become for the Romans, which is Cupid. Cupid is this little boy with the arrows. Remember that the Romans always reduced something to its material aspect. Dionysus, all this sort of altar state, becomes the god of wine. Eros, this force of love, cosmic force, becomes a little shooting arrows. So that's the Romans. Okay, next. But here we see another characteristic of classical Greece is the celebration of male beauty. And I think this is very important. Remember this whole symposium, which is really about men having emotional, intellectual, very, very significant bonds with other men, that communions that produce immortal dialogues, and then having rivalries between disciples and teachers, who is the favorite student, and the beauty of Agathon, and all these things. So we see that actually this idea of beauty, and remember that the theory of Aristotle is that what is beautiful is also probably what is good. And so once you get what is beautiful, it's probably what is good for you, and then you want to keep it. So there is this idea that beauty and goodness are one. They're not enemies. It's with Christianity they become enemies, eventually. Okay? So this idea of this idealized body of a male youth is really a trope that we find in many Greek sculptures of this time. So this is Adonis. Remember, Adonis is the Venus lover. Also in Metamorphosis, the tale that you read, it's Adonis who falls in love with Venus. Next, and then Apollo. Apollo is also the god of poetry, of intelligence, but also beauty. Okay, and so here's a representation, and look at this Apollo. He is, in a way, he's very feminine. It's a simple way to put it. He is offering himself for somebody's look. You can look at him and derive pleasure. You could be a male or a female, still find him pleasurable to look at. He is very, in a way, he's very passive. He's inviting that gaze. He's not a warrior, muscular type. Not at all. The opposite. Okay, next. And here we have Hermes, another Olympian god. He's a bit more muscular. He's a little more, substantial as a male, you might say. But nonetheless, he is quite harmonious. And it is, again, this celebration of an ideal. He's not old. He's young. He's very healthy and in good shape. Next. And here is another Apollo. We see that Apollo is slightly more gentle in this representation as well. And next. Okay, this is another very well-known sculpture. Remember the Olympic Games, Las Olimpiadas, right? Which is this time where the Greek policies have chosen, instead of being at war with each other, to sublimate that hostility, that rivalry into excellence. Athletic excellence. So they institute the Olympic Games, where every city sends their best athletes, and then whoever wins is more respected from the city. So it's a way to sublimate warfare into athleticism and perfection. So here we have a very interesting sculpture that clearly refers to one of the games, which was to throw this disc as far as possible, and it's a game that requires the coordination of many skills. Your muscular system, your nervous system, your senses, they all have to be perfectly harmonized and developed to obtain the maximum result. Okay, and it's also, the sculpture itself depicts that moment when he is throwing it. See the movement. It's not like a statue like this. It's a very dynamic statue that almost moves as you look at it. You imagine how he got to that position and is going to continue. Okay, next is another other takes, and there are many different reproductions of the original. Next. Okay, here we have a representation of Eros. Okay, so this would refer perhaps to those in the dialogue who say that he's the youngest god. Like, certainly not Phaedrus, who says he's one of the older gods, but rather the youngest, Agathon, who says he's a younger god. But in any event, it's one of the representations, and it kind of moves into Cupid. In one way, we can anticipate Cupid. Okay, next. One comment is that it's difficult to represent the Titans. How do you represent chaos? How do you represent wind? You can't. They're not human forms, so it's difficult to find an incarnation. This is a very interesting sculpture. Look at the genital parts. You see breasts, right? And you also see a penis. Okay? So for those of you who are interested in transgenderism today, which is a very common topic, it's not new. It just had a different name. Okay? One of the tales of Ovid, one of the legends of Metamorphosis that you're going to read, is the one of Salamacis and Hermaphroditus. Hermaphroditus, Salamacis is this nymph who pursues Hermaphroditus relentlessly. She's just after him. Okay? And eventually the gods grace her with becoming one with him. So that's how legend explains the fact that some individuals are part female and part male, or they are a combination of the two, or they have, characteristics of both. Okay? So because this has always existed, it's nothing new, intersex people have always been born, then we have the evidence that they were born at that time too. But look at how this culture celebrates the beauty of this. There's nothing degrading or deformed. It's just a perfection. Again, there is this desire for perfection, beauty, harmony, youth, and it can come in a hermaphrodite. Okay? This is very important. You can refer also to Aristophanes' theory in the Symposium, where he says that some of us have been separated from the other half is a person of the same gender, the other half is a person of the opposite gender, and originally the hermaphrodite was that person that was part male, part female. Okay, so if we are looking for another half who is of the opposite gender, according to Aristophanes, we would have been a hermaphrodite before the separation. Okay, so here's another example of the hermaphrodite. Next, okay, this is a reconstruction of the frieze of the Parthenon. It's a painting that represents